Bill, we have some good questions. Some of these came across Facebook, and some people have been posting some questions for you on the Facebook page, as well as some questions that we receive here at Reasonable Faith. This first one, Franklin says, Dear Dr. Craig, why do you think a B theory, tenseless theory of time, is incompatible with the incarnation? I know you think events like Christ's crucifixion are not really done or over with on a B theory understanding of time. But my thinking is, why must God be bound to the same way we perceive time, and so as to relate to the world in that same way? Can God relate to the world via some X theory of time, or B theory tenseless time perhaps, while we as finite beings still perceive the world under an A theory or a tensed view of time? Bill, we've talked a lot about A and B theory of time on past podcasts.
Now, for those who aren't familiar with the terminology, let's just make it clear. According to the A theory of time, temporal becoming is real. Things really come into being and pass away. The past and the future do not exist, but are merely potentialities. Whereas on the B theory, past, present, and future are all equally real. And temporal becoming is just an illusion of human consciousness. And what I claim is that the tenseless theory of time is incompatible not with Christ's incarnation, but really with his crucifixion and resurrection. Because on the B theory of time, Christ's crucifixion is still just as real as it ever was. Christ is there on the cross in AD 33. And his resurrection is just the resurrection of a later stage of the four-dimensional space-time entity that is Christ. So it really evacuates, I think, the victory of the resurrection, and it means that the evil of the crucifixion is like a permanent stain in space-time that is never really expunged or done away with. Now, he says maybe you can have some other theory of time, some X theory of time. Fine, if he's got that, let's hear it, enunciate it. But the point remains, I think, that the B theory or tenseless theory of time does seem to have these consequences, which I think are theologically unacceptable.
Next question. Dr. Craig, as I understand it, time, space, matter, and energy began to exist at a finite point in the past. I see time as basically a series of events telling us when those events occurred in relation to each other. He has two questions. One, is my understanding of time correct? And two, if it is correct and time began, does this mean the members of the Trinity didn't have interactions before or outside of, not sure of the correct term, time? Robert from Facebook.
I think that Robert's understanding of time is basically correct. I also accept a relational view of time. And it doesn't mean that the members of the Trinity don't have interactions existing timelessly, but it would mean that those interactions are not changing. And that's very plausible when you think about God. There's nothing that the Father knows that the Son and the Spirit don't already know. There's nothing that the Father wills that the Son and the Spirit don't already will. Nothing the Father loves that they don't already love. So it seems to me that the persons of the Trinity very plausibly stand in changeless, timeless relationships of knowledge, love, and will, and therefore do have interactions in that tenseless or timeless sense, but they don't have changing interactions.
Next question. Dear Dr. Craig, would you consider yourself a skeptical theist, or does it lead to too much skepticism? Perry from Facebook.
Now, here we definitely need to define our terms. The term skeptical theism is a terminus technicus for a certain solution to the problem of evil and suffering. It is the view that we are not in a position to make with any sort of confidence probability judgments that God does not have morally sufficient reasons for permitting the evil and suffering to enter our lives. And I think that that claim is almost undeniably true, given our limits in time and space, our inability to see the future. We're simply not in a position to say with any confidence, it's highly improbable that God has a morally sufficient reason for allowing this to occur. But having said that, Kevin, I hate the name skeptical theism, and I never use it because I think it has utterly wrong connotations. I am not skeptical at all. Rather, I'm confident that God exists, that he has morally sufficient reasons for the evil and suffering in the world. And therefore, I think this is a very unfortunate term that we ought to put behind us.
Question number 4. Dr. Craig, what is your opinion of Max Tegmark's theory named mathematical universe hypothesis? According to this assumption, the universe is not only successfully described by mathematics, but is itself a mathematical structure. The very existence of something is, therefore, based on its mathematical coherence. Eli from Facebook.
What Eli is getting at here is this incredible and paradoxical coincidence of the application of mathematics to the physical world. And it is so difficult to explain why the physical world would be describable by these abstract mathematical structures that someone like Tegmark has reverted to saying, well, maybe the world itself just is a mathematical structure. And so, of course, mathematics applies to the world. Now, while I would agree that the world can be built upon a mathematical blueprint or structure, to claim that the world is a mathematical structure like a set or matrix or some other geometrical space, I think is to confuse abstract objects with concrete objects. The world in which we live is physical, it is concrete, it is causally connected, and none of that is true of the realm of abstract objects, the mathematical realm. They are not characterized by materiality, physicality, or causal connections. And so I think that this is a desperate and implausible alternative with respect to the explaining the applicability of mathematics to the physical realm.
Question number 5. Dear Dr. Craig, what is your take on the ideas of Peter Van Inwagen? On Van Inwagen's, there are two things he wants to know on. Several things, but let's look at 2. On Van Inwagen's account of the general resurrection being given in materialist terms, and on his account of material constitution, namely that only living things and philosophical atoms exist. Wow.
Yeah, I'll be very brief here. Peter Van Inwagen is a celebrated mathematician who taught at the University of Notre Dame. He is a Christian, but he's also a materialist about human beings. He is not an anthropological dualist who believes in soul and body. He believes that we are just our living bodies. We are animals, in effect. And this makes it very difficult to explain the resurrection of the dead. How is it that this animal body, which I'm identical with, can go out of existence and then be recreated at the second coming of Christ so that it's the same animal body rather than just a duplicate? Well, Van Inwagen's solution to this, which I've been reading about just this week by coincidence, is to say that it's possible that God, when a person dies, snatches away the real body and puts in its place a sort of duplicate of it so that it appears that that's the body that decays and rots away, whereas in fact the real body is kept by God until the day of resurrection. And while this might be a logical possibility, I mean, I think this is just utterly implausible, and not at all in accord with, I think, Jewish views of the resurrection of the body. If you want to read a good critique of Van Inwagen's account of the general resurrection from his materialist standpoint, look at William Hasker's book, Hasker, William Hasker, The Emergent Self. And in the final chapter on survival after death, he has a very fair-minded critique of Van Inwagen here. Now, the second question concerns another metaphysical thesis of Van Inwagen's that is very novel. He thinks that the only material objects that exist are either things that are alive, living things, or else fundamental particles that are not composed of tinier particles. So he doesn't believe that there are such things as chairs and tables and buildings and automobiles and things like that. He only thinks there's just all these fundamental particles that are arranged in chair-like or table-like ways. Now, I don't have any brief on this issue. Frankly, I don't know what to make of it. I'm a common sense sort of guy. And so unless I see really powerful reasons to think that chairs and tables and so forth don't exist, I'm going to go with my common sense beliefs. And so Van Inwagen would have a good deal of explaining, I think, for me to be persuaded that his view is correct. But having said that, this is not an issue that I've studied at all, and therefore I'll just leave it an open question that our listeners can explore if they wish to. He's written a book called Material Beings, in which he lays out this view.
I think the two of you shared the platform at Southern Evangelical Seminary. Well, that was a long time ago.
Well, and we have just completed a book together, actually, Kevin, on abstract objects, whether or not they exist. Another of Van Inwagen's metaphysical theses is that he believes that abstract objects exist. He believes there are numbers and properties and shapes and things of that sort. Even though they don't do anything. They don't have any causal effect upon the world. They're not needed to explain why things are the way they are. He doesn't think that, for example, a green book is green because it exemplifies the property of being green. So he has all of these metaphysical abstract entities in his ontology that are metaphysically idle, that don't really do anything. So Van Inwagen is sort of like the common man's image of what a philosopher is like, someone who's got these bizarre metaphysical theses that he actually believes and defends, and yet he argues very persuasively for them.
Question number 6. Dr. Craig, I have really enjoyed learning from you, including your 2 courses in 2021 through HBU on the moral argument and the historical atom. Many atheists will claim that empathy should serve as the foundation for objective moral values. I've heard you say that empathy is a terrible foundation for objective morality. I would love to hear your thoughts on why this is such a bad foundation for objective moral values and duties. Danny from Facebook.
Well, the reason is obviously because empathy is purely subjective. There's no objectivity to it whatsoever. A psychopath feels no empathy for his victims as he bludgeons them with a hammer. Someone else might feel great empathy for other persons. And so you simply cannot equate being empathetic with moral goodness or badness because it's purely subjective.
Question number 7. Hello, Dr. Craig. Thank you so much for your patience with me in answering my question. It strengthens my faith more than you know. I have a problem. The way that I think about the dynamic between the moral argument and perfect being theology feels awfully circular. When the moral argument is made, it posits God as the grounding of objective moral values and duties. In order to do this, however, the point has to be made along the way that God, by definition, is morally perfect. However, in order to argue that God is morally perfect, one must argue that there is some sort of moral objectivity which such a person believes to be grounded in God. Though I can't clearly put my finger on it, it seems that some sort of circularity exists between perfect being theology and the moral argument. In order to prove the moral argument, you must use perfect being theology, and in order to prove perfect being theology, you must assume that God grounds objective moral value, which is assuming that the moral argument is true. This irks me, as these two positions are among my favorite to hold. Help me to think what mistake I'm making here. Greetings from Texas, Caden.
Okay, well, I've got good news for Caden because I think he can hold these two perspectives consistently. What he's failing to do is to make a very important distinction between the order of being and the order of knowing. In the order of being, God is primary and grounds the moral values and duties that derive from God. But in the order of knowing, we first become acquainted with moral values and duties through our moral experience, and then we infer to God as the source of those moral duties and values that we find in our experience. So just distinguish between the order of being and the order of knowing. In the order of being, you begin with God as primary. In the order of knowing, you begin with your own experience as primary and infer to God.
Next question. Dear Professor Craig, my question is about our attitude toward animals. I am specifically interested in how exactly Christians, Orthodox, Catholics, and those Protestants who are really Christians, justify slaughtering and eating animals. I've been a vegan for some time now, and I am a Christian, a true Christian. I'm not a Mormon or anything like that, she says, and it is not clear to me why we Christians collectively do not raise our voice against injustice and cruelty to animals the same way we justifiably fight against killing unborn children, for example. Animals have the ability of near human intelligence, especially compared to children. They can feel and understand emotions. They are able to love. They feel pain and suffering, and they are completely powerless compared to us humans. And in other words, we can do to them what we want. Doesn't Christianity teach us compassion, love for those who are weaker, respect for life? Professor, this really bothers me. If you can answer my question, it would help me a lot. God bless you. This is from Jan. I don't think this is your Jan, Bill.
No,
this.
no, hardly.
Jan,
this is not an issue which I have looked at in any depth. But since I am definitely carnivorous, I guess I need to say something about why I'm not a vegan. And I suppose the reasons would be that I don't think that animals are moral agents. I think she's completely wrong in saying that they have the ability of near human intelligence. That is certainly not true. My studies of the historical atom made that very clear to me. There are light years that separate us from chimpanzees, for example. And even in that case, we don't eat the chimpanzees. So it's just not clear to me that there is any sort of immorality and injustice in eating animals. Now, I certainly do believe that we shouldn't have cruelty toward animals. I think it's wrong to torture animals and to have slaughtering that would be torturous in that way. So I do think that the way in which we slaughter animals does need to be humane, but I'm not persuaded that it would be immoral to eat them. We seem to have been made for that. Eating meat is extremely healthy, whereas veganism is very unhealthy, I think. And so it's the way we've been constituted. I would also say that while Christianity teaches us compassion and love for others, for the weak, respect for life, that's with regard to human beings. There's nothing in the Bible that would suggest that you shouldn't eat meat. On the contrary, I mean, the Jews slaughtered and butchered their animals in the temple and the tabernacle. So I don't think you can appeal to Christianity's ethic of compassion toward other human beings as a basis for not eating animals. So I guess I would just say I haven't seen anything that in my mind would cause me to think it's wrong to eat meat.
Question number 11. Hi, Dr. Craig. I have a question about the Trinity. I know that the Trinity is basically saying that God is multi-personal being, or that there are three persons in one God. But even though they are persons, not beings, but still, at the end of the day, there are three. What is the difference between three separate beings, like in polytheism? What I mean is that it does not matter, person or being. At the end of the day, there are three. Doesn't it mean it is still some kind of polytheism? Thank you. Amando from Indonesia.
Well, I don't think that it does imply polytheism, Amando, and I would invite you to look at my chapter on the Trinity in my and J.P. Moreland's book, Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. The difference between a tri-personal being and three separate deities or beings is that in the one case you have one spiritual substance, one soul, as it were. In the other case, you have three spiritual substances, three souls, and that's obviously quite different. So I would say that God is a soul which is so richly endowed with rational faculties that he has three centers of self-consciousness rather than merely one, as you and I do.
Final question today, Dr. Craig. It says, Dear Dr. Craig, what would compel one to move from philosophical theism to some sort of organized religion? Or simply, why even think God has interacted at all with creation? Background. A philosophical theist, I love Christianity, but I feel I don't have any rational warrant to think God has sought a relationship with his creation at all. So therefore, it would be begging the question to affirm Christianity. James in the UK.
Well, I'm just delighted that James believes in God and that he loves Christianity. And what I would want to invite James to do is to look at the evidence for the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus, his personal claims and teachings, and then especially his resurrection from the dead. One wouldn't expect there to be any sort of historical evidence for so extraordinary an event as that. But in my doctoral work at the University of Munich, I discovered that, in fact, the wide majority of New Testament scholars today are agreed on the basic facts underlying the inference to the resurrection of Jesus. So I'd encourage James to look at my book, The Sun Rises, S-O-N, The Sun Rises, as a case for the resurrection, or to look at my book, Reasonable Faith, the chapter on the resurrection, as well as the claims of Christ. And I think that can help him to move beyond mere theism to the beauty of Christian theism.
Some good questions today. And Bill, as always, good answers.
Yeah.
We'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you, Kevin.